Greetings, my name is Douglas Wilson, and I'm here today with Francis Foucachon, and we're here to talk about food. As it turns out, we've both written a book on food. Yours is called Food for Thought. You want to hold it up for Food for Thought? And I've written a book that's just coming out called Confessions of a Food Catholic. This is just the cover. All the insides, the gluten has been removed from this. But it's we're talking about food issues and all the issues surrounding food. So let me start by asking you, Francis, what's your book about?
Well, my book is really about food, obviously, written by a French man. And you have to understand that if you hear a French accent, it's not just a French accent. It's also that
you're not putting it on.
I'm not pretending. It is real. And actually, I was trained as a chef before I went to seminary. And I happened to be trained with one of the top 10 chefs in Lyon, France, which is a capital of gastronomy in the world. So as I grew up, obviously, with my training, food was important.
Right.
And I was raised in a family of 7 children where food was important.
Right.
And obviously, France and the French are known about their food worldwide.
Right.
So when I moved to the United States, that was my third move here, and we stayed here for a longer time and created a restaurant called West of Paris in Moscow, Idaho. Really the result of these 5-6 years of doing restaurant business here made me want to write something, because I had so many clients and friends, knowing I was an ordained minister, knowing I was a chef, saying there are a lot of gaps in all these things.
How do you connect
those
two things?
Exactly. And as a Presbyterian, I think that we do view life as a whole and not just compartments, and therefore food is part of life. And so I wanted to write a book really for Americans. Right. The French reading my book would say, what's the story? This is what we believe.
The French equivalent of duh.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it really is. So the French would say, big deal, no big deal. We all practice that, although because France is so pagan today, I think there's a lot of missing link there. Mm-hmm. But I wrote that book for Americans, mostly American Christians, to understand that food was more than fuel for the body.
Right.
I think the American pragmatism seeks to see food as a necessity.
Right.
So we can do activities, we can do things. And the French will say, no, food is not just a necessity. It is, but it's more than that. And so I wrote the book in view of showing that it has to do with community, with fellowship. It has to do with also God's gift to us, which is more than just limited to a few ingredients. Right. There's so much abundance in God's creation, and I feel like we are missing most of it. Yes. And there's a lot more there on the market that is for us. So I try to give the notion of the beauty of the food, the not just the taste of it, but the beauty of the sight, what it takes to enjoy a good meal around fellowship and so on. So that's really mostly my book, The French Way.
So you can't really have a worldview without having a food view.
That's very true. Absolutely. Right?
Yes. And as soon as you say something like food view, obviously food has to have something more done to it than just viewing it.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and that sort of reveals that worldview is more than thinking; it's practice, how you engage, incarnational living, how you live in community, and how food is a necessity there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So I wrote that book, but you wrote a book too.
I did. Yes.
and I found the title very interesting. And so many people don't understand the word Catholic. They think Catholic Roman, Roman Catholic. So Confession of a Food Catholic. Yes. Tell us about what does that mean?
Okay, the word Catholic simply means universal. Mm-hmm. Another way you could put it a little less provocatively if I said Confessions of a Food Omnivore. God has given us this wide and wild array of things to eat, millions of tastes and combinations of tastes and so on. So I wanted to talk about how God has, in Christ, declared all foods clean. Mm-hmm. He had prohibited certain foods under the Mosaic Code, in the New Testament, all foods are declared clean. And so I wanted to emphasize that. Catholic gives you more of a theological sense that we're talking about theology when we're talking about food Catholicism. If you just said omnivore, people might say, okay, well, that means we're not just carnivorous. We're not, it's more than that. So I wanted to have it, make it sound like it's a spiritual issue, which it is, a textual, exegetical issue, but it doesn't have anything to do with Roman Catholicism as such. It simply means universal, and universal in a distinctively Christian sense.
Very good, very good. And so what did you cover broadly in your book?
Okay, the main target that I'm going after, the main problem that I'm trying to address as a pastor is the problem of food fussing or food phobias or food fads, food Pharisaism, which I have seen a lot of. Some of it is just simple snobbery, like someone who's a real foodie. Some of it is all my friends are gluten insensitive or lactose intolerant, and I'm feeling left out, and I have to join in the fun. I have to have an issue with food, and in my thinking, the central issue in Scripture about food has to do not so much with what you eat, but who you eat with. All right, so it's not what's on the table; it's who's across the table. Right.
Yes.
And once you start putting artificial barriers, like I can't eat this and I can't eat that and I can't eat the other thing, you're not just affecting. It's not just your use of the illustration of fuel. You're saying more than I take this car takes diesel as opposed to regular. You're saying, and I can't come to your gas station.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't fellowship with you.
Yeah.
And I make the necessary qualifications. There are some, obviously there are people with high allergies, and if they eat a peanut, they're going to be down at the ER the rest of the night.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to disparage the people who have the affliction of a true food allergy, but I've started to see a lot of faddishness and persnicketyness of I don't do that, I don't do that, and up to the point where someone's invited to come over for dinner and they bring their own food.
Yes.
And that's just
I can't comprehend. I mean, I can't, as a Frenchman, I can't ever imagine that happen in France.
Right.
You would never dare do such a thing.
No.
This is so offensive.
Or it's really offensive.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just bad manners in terms of American customs or French customs. I think that is an assault on the ethos of the New Testament. The New Testament is all about who can you eat with.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
The first big controversy in the New Testament was whether Jews and Gentiles could sit down and enjoy table fellowship together. And I've seen a resurgence of the kind of persnicketyness where I can't eat with you or I can't be with your kind. And we're told in the Scripture to eat what's set before eat what's set before you. And I believe that you should go accept every dinner invitation that with the mindset that the person across the table, my hostess, is far more important to me than whether or not I would have ordered that thing that I was just served in a restaurant. So I've eaten things in homes that I would never order I would never order in a restaurant, but I think it's my obligation to love the other person by eating what's set before me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's actually I read your book, and that really got my attention to see how careful you are to make sure that for some people it's a true issue, and that you want to make sure that, for one thing, if they know it's a true issue, they shouldn't be offended by the book.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so I thought you were very, very careful to make sure. I do have a wonder about this new phenomenon of allergies. I'm raising the question because Again, I grew up. I'm 62 years old, and I grew up in the food business before I became a minister. And really, I never recall a time where we had clients come into a restaurant saying, "I have allergies."
Right.
It's really new, and that's new for me in the last 10 years in North America.
Well, and it's printing. It's all on the menu.
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Right.
I know. Yeah, it's becoming, and it was an issue for my restaurant, having to face that for the first time in my life, thinking, I don't know what to do with this.
Right.
And I had to adjust, but really wondering, what you raise in your book, the question is, there are some people for whom it's real, and we're not getting into the why.
Right.
They are probably behind us, but I do believe there are a lot of people who think they have allergies or some kind of food issues that they don't.
Right.
And I think you bring that up pretty well, and that I really appreciated that part. I think that was a necessary thing, and as we talk about what needs to be written these days on food, that was a needed subject to be addressed.
And I think when we were talking privately about this, you mentioned, and I think this is a glaring problem, is that not only do we have all this going on among Christians, food issues happening all the time, but there's very, very little teaching on it.
Yes.
Ministers aren't talking about it because they don't want to blow their church up, or they don't want a big controversy about that.
Yeah.
But I believe that if you allow this kind of division to take root in the church, you're just preparing for a bigger explosion later.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I think very right.
all right, so let me ask you a question. And I'll probably riff off it after you answer it. But we're the fact that when I say that I'm a food Catholic, that I'm not intending to say that this means that there's no such thing as standards in cooking or standards in there's such a thing as an expensive meal that ought to be an expensive meal. There are expensive meals that ought not to be expensive meals. There are cheap meals that ought to be expensive, and cheap meals that ought to be cheap. And so as Christians, God has made the world in a hierarchical way. There's high art and there's low art. There's folk art and there's folk music and there's Bach. So we're not egalitarian. So as a trained chef, talk to me a little bit about how can you sort of argue for and insist on high standards with high standards in the kitchen without it turning into food snobbery.
Yeah, and I think that's where there is probably a very thin line. It's very easy to go from one to the other side, to be aiming at quality without becoming a snob, a food snob. And I've seen that over and over, and I can even see how myself, at times, I felt like, I'm probably leaning too much towards being a food snob. And I think we have to be it's a cautious thing. We have to be aware that in the sinful world, sin is part of everything, and therefore we've got to be constantly aware of how do I aim for the best and the quality, because as a Christian, I think we need to aim at the best. And so food is part of creation, and God is giving us that mandate to master it, and therefore, as a master chef, my job is to create the best food possible, and it means quality. As we say in real estate, the three things in real estate is location, location, location. Where I say in food, it's really quality, quality, quality. It's hard to make something very good with cheap quality. Sometimes you budget
cheap raw resources.
Yes,
right,
cheap
like
raw
the beef,
resources.
the beef.
Exactly. Yes, you can have a cheap piece of beef that is hard as stone. Fine, you can still do something with it. You can redeem it. That means you're going to have to cook in a certain way. But if you can get better meat, better quality meat, more fat in it, as a matter of fact, you're going to have more pleasure to eat that meat. So for me, the quality and the pleasure that goes with it go hand to hand.
And quality in, quality out.
Quality, yes, exactly. So that's really what I think we can aim at. But one of the things that your book mentions, and I think it's good to remember, is that you've got to go with your budget. And that's where you don't want to make a moral choice.
Right.
Then, you all should do that because we do that because that's the best. That is the best.
Right.
But that is the best if you can afford it, and not every day.
Right.
You cannot eat like that every day. You would probably get sick anyways. You won't even appreciate it.
You run out of money halfway through the month.
Exactly. and then, you know, having peanut butter, no. So I think it's good to have these seasons of feasting. And that's why I like the time of feast, you know, once a week on the Sabbath. And actually that's in my book, there's a whole chapter of Sabbath dinner that allows the hostess to prepare the food ahead of time so she can fully enjoy the Sabbath
with participate in the Sabbath.
Exactly, instead of being in the kitchen the whole time. So I wrote recipes of high quality, good food that you can prepare ahead of time.
Okay.
So, and that is to allow us to have the part of food that we're talking about, which is fellowship and communion and community. But really, you cannot eat like that every day. So I am a chef. I love very good food, but I eat very simple food every day in the week.
Right.
But I keep the great food for special occasions.
A great example, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this as well. A great example of someone who had refined and disciplined and educated tastes when it came to food was Robert Capon's work. His best, The Supper of the Lamb is a great book, and in that book he's no food egalitarian. He'll comment about this dish had all the texture but none of the taste of a rubber glove. But he says at the same time that he'll eat as much processed cheese as someone will hand him. So it's like he's got a disciplined palate, but he's not proud.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's like if he were talking to someone, witnessing to someone, and they invited him to sit down in a fast food restaurant, he wouldn't be too proud to go there.
That's right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Basically, and to do it without exuding the demeanor of I'm slumming it, or but at the same time, knowing what quality is, what a good meal is.
Yeah.
So do you let's talk for a minute about the ethical problems that attend means of production. Do you have any strong feelings on that?
Well, we had an interesting debate not long ago at NSA
Yes.
on that, and some of the questions were touching that. If the question is it right or wrong, I say it's both. I think there is a right and a wrong way to do things, but in the reality, and your book covers that in the way the world is today.
Right.
We're not just in a remote place with agriculture, and I can feed so many people, and therefore for few generations I can grow to 5 acres. You can mention something like that. And then of course the growing of the cities requires some organization, and therefore you cannot avoid the production, whether it's in the small business or big business.
Right.
The question is more how do we do this in a sinful world, in a way that we can do things right. You mentioned there's a fascinating chapter in your book actually about where the government should be and should not be.
Yeah.
And I think this is really right on. And as a restaurant owner, I remember I had the duty to make sure that my place was clean. I call my kitchen a lab. It should be as clean as a lab. And so the clients could walk in anytime and see it. And that speaks a lot. Yeah. So that's my respect. My respect is I'm going to keep the food neat. I'm not going to serve food that is turned bad. I'm going to serve my clients in God's name, in Christ's name, and therefore respect and honor them that way. Big companies should do the same. Right. And as Christians, therefore, we do have a duty to make sure that as much as possible, because we can't always check it out. As you mentioned in your book, you take a lifelong to figure it out. But I think as much as possible, I will feel like we have a duty to make sure that we're doing things right. As you say in your book, we animals and humans are not the same. Right. And so we cannot trade the same. But I'm a hunter. And when I hunt, I want to make sure that I shoot that elk or that deer to the heart, because I don't want that animal to suffer. Right. And also, the result of that is that meat is going to be more tender.
Right.
And so it's a win-win.
Win-win.
Yeah.
All right, so we take it as a given that Proverbs says a righteous man has regard for the life of his beast.
Yes.
And that doesn't change if he's got 10,000 head of cattle.
No.
It doesn't change if he's got hundreds of thousands of chickens.
Absolutely.
A righteous man has regard for the life of his beast.
Yeah.
And the Christian church and the ministers of the church, to the extent that they're exhorting people who are involved in food production, that what the Bible teaches has relevance there for them as well.
Yes.
So that's on the one hand. On the other, if you have billions of people in the world today, all created in the image of God, that number of people requires some level of factory farming.
Yes.
You can't feed everybody.
Yes.
Without factory farming. Mm-hmm. But there are small 3-acre operations that are filthy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are huge productions that are clean and efficient, and
Yes. Yes.
the way they ought to be. And you could have a huge dirty factory, and a small, poorly run.
Yes.
So basically, the principle is that we ought to what we're doing ought to be sanitary, lawful, humane, all of those things. Mm-hmm. And I'm not responsible to pursue every bite I take all the way up the food chain.
That's right.
Because
it's impossible.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm responsible to add my voice to the testimony of the church, saying the way we live matters.
Yes.
So it's quality. It's not just quality in the cooking. It would be quality in the farming, quality in the the research,
Yes.
That sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I do think we have a duty there as Christians. Obviously, that's one of the reasons also I like to buy things locally, not just because I like the fresh products, but also because I can know how things are. I mean, if I know that someone is raising a cow, if I can see it, that helps.
Or you could, it's like someone walking into your kitchen.
Exactly.
Right. You could walk to the farm where you.
Exactly. But again, it's not a moral choice. It's if I can choose that, I will. But I also understand to come back to your question, when you have huge factories, they have other challenges. Mm-hmm. The small farm has a challenge as a small farm. Right. The big factories have different challenges.
Right.
And therefore, these big factories have different duties, but they are necessary to be able to feed the world the way we can do it today with today's technology. We have come to something incredible when you think about food in the world today. We can provide food more than ever in history, massively, because of the technology. And so I think this is a really high thing. It's wonderful. The downside will be you lose some of the quality.
Right. So let's change direction a little bit. What are your thoughts on the relationship of the Lord's Supper and everyday eating? Should there be a connection? Do we disciple ourselves there at all? Does the Lord disciple us there? How do you see the connection there?
Well, I think it goes both ways too. I mean, we are, for one thing, on the Lord's Supper, this is God's invitation. Christ invites us to his table. So we come as guests.
Yes.
As such, we come and as receivers. Mm-hmm. But the Lord's Supper has an extension to also communion and community. Right. And therefore, as the first Christians did, they were also very often having a meal, a full meal around the Lord's Supper. Right. So church service, Lord's Supper, a meal. Mm-hmm. And therefore, this is a highlight of the week where you don't just get spiritual food as God speaks to you in the service. Mm-hmm. You commune with God, but also you commune with the church, the body of Christ. Right. And the food is almost like the glue that puts it all together.
Yes.
And I think this is one of the things that Christians can claim to have, that the world in their best parties can never claim to have, because of that fellowship.
And so, going back to a point I made earlier, that it's not fundamentally what you're eating, but who you're eating with.
Yeah.
When one of the things, and in our congregation, we have the Lord's Supper every week, which means that every week I sit down with all my brothers and sisters and eat and drink together with them.
Yeah.
So it's and with Christ. So Christ is at the head of the table. Christ is present in the meal. So I'm eating with them, and that sort of sets the pitch. It's like before you begin your week, on the first day of the week, God says, "Okay, everyone, let's do something very important. Let's eat together." Right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons why the modern family in the West is disintegrating is because we don't eat together. Right? People either it's all drive-through or eat over the sink before you rush out the door to go to work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But when I was a boy, I'm about the same age as you are, I'm 63, but when I was a boy, our family sat down at the table every night.
Yeah.
You know, it was just, this is what we did. It was a family dinner.
Yeah.
And our kids growing up, it was the same thing. Every night we sat down together.
Yeah.
And then we began the practice of a weekly Sabbath dinner, which we do Saturday night, tied to your comment about Nancy works on it during the day Saturday, and then when the food's hot and ready, her Sabbath begins along with everyone's.
Yeah.
So we sit down together with our kids, our kids and their spouses, and all the grandkids come over weekly, and then company, and so we range every week between 28 and 40 people sitting down. And it seems to me that even though that's not the Lord's Supper, that's a quintessential meal in a Christian home where there are a bunch of people sharing the same food. We have this in common.
That's right.
And we can say when someone bakes the pie, and then everyone praises the pie. Who made the pie? Thank you for the pie.
Yeah.
Who did the roast? Thank you for the roast. That sort of thing. It's a way of loving each other and giving you something to talk about and experience together.
Absolutely.
Is that your experience as well?
It is. I mean, it's very similar. I actually cover some of that in my book as well, showing how part of the French way, and that's again French pagan, because of I think that's a result of the Christianity that used to be part of Europe at one point.
Cultural inheritance.
Cultural inheritance, exactly.
Right.
But it's still today that these 3 times a day is a time where you know it's a secure time. It's a time where it's because it's fixed, you can forget everything else. Obviously, no television, forget the iPhone, leave everything behind. We are here to be together, to communicate.
Right.
Interestingly, I've had very few cases of counseling as a pastor over the years with families who had this 3 times a day sitting down at the dinner time. Because a lot of the issues are dealt with around the table.
Yes.
In other words, it doesn't have to be, we have a conflict. It's like we can have something that could avoid the conflict by communication. And I think that's this part of, this kind of gives security. If you have worries, if you have all kinds of things, it's almost like it's rewarding. It's a time together. And food is a comfort. And so that kind of goes with it. And obviously you take the time. And that's kind of part of my culture. It's important to take the time. We don't just gulp food to be able to get, that's what I was saying earlier, to go to get some activities.
Right.
This is the activity.
Yeah.
And when we had actually sometimes people over as a church time, it's mostly on Sundays, people were not asking for the activity. We spent 3-4 hours around the table. We ate, we drank, and we fellowship. And I got more out of this time where I could communicate the gospel and receive from brothers and sisters doing that than all kinds of fixed time. Not that there's no room for that, but fixed time of studying. Okay, let's study this and this. It's more relaxed, and it's more natural to talk that way.
Right. We had, and as a pastor, if I were talking to a family and nobody was ever, it was no adultery or yelling and screaming or fighting or abuse, but everybody in the family got their own microwaved thing and went off to their bedroom to watch television.
Yeah.
I would say something's wrong even if nothing else, this is fundamentally
That says something.
wrong. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to address this.
Yes.
And similar to your experience, when our kids were growing up and in school, we would, I mentioned earlier, we sit down at dinner every night, but oftentimes we'd be there for hours.
Yes.
So the kids would come and they'd debrief from their day at school and what happened, and we talk about everything. And so it's not just who you're eating with, but who you're talking to while you're eating.
That's right.
Right. It's a different kind of communication. It's a fellowship communication as opposed to let's meet together and talk about a subject. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
It is, and both have value.
Yes.
But this, you cannot produce one with the other,
Right.
because of the meal. Because of, I mean, you know, in Babette's Feast,
Yes.
how this is
Great,
to me
great movie. Get the movie.
Oh, it's fascinating. I watch it once a year, and it's a very slow movie, and that's
There's
we're not used to that.
No motorcycles.
No
explosions.
No explosions. Exactly. It's very slow. You kind of. I remember the first time I saw it, I thought, where is this going? This is very. But I think the grand final is powerful. The
Yes.
power of a meal and the giving. The way that French lady who actually worked in a place that I happen to know in France, served the wine that I know very well. The power of that meal with these people is, to me, is a strong statement about the importance of meals in the community. So absolutely,
Yes.
and I think we have to fight, that in our society because of the fast pace of everything. And I've grown my children saying, you never want the good to become the enemy of the best.
Right.
And so you have to make choices and choose the best. And the mealtime is part of the best you are making choices for every day. So,
Yes. Very good. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.